what I'm looking at is something like what you've got up on the wall, and that is the 20 topographies that we've got. I'm going to zoom in on one just to, so for the sake of the argument, we'll say that this one here is the one that's been selected after I've used my criteria to narrow it down to 6, and I've selected one. So that's the only one that we need to go with moving forward. The easiest thing for me to do is just create another artboard with the document that I've already got. So I'm just going to use my artboard tool to do that. I'll align it right to the side of my existing one. And let's just draw it out there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it the correct size over here, and with this artboard selected, I've got now control of the width and the height of it. I could have also copied this one since it'll be roughly the same size, but one way to control what happens when you use transformation tools is to establish what the reference point is. So this little icon that's up here in Rhino, or I'm sorry, in Illustrator, will tell us what the reference point is off of any of these numbers that change. So if I tell it right now that I want a certain size, it's going to reference off of the center. So if I told it, well, no, I want it to be 23 inches instead, it's going to reference from the center point. But if I decide that I want it to be off of this corner point because I like where this corner point is, I change where the reference point is down here to darken it on the bottom left corner. So now that when I change my width to be 30, it's going to go off of that corner, and I'm going to change my height to be 22 off of that corner. I'm making it basically the same size as my drawing here. So once that's done, I'm going to select the drawing itself. I'm going to select the whole drawing just by drawing a box around it. I don't need the text at this point. And I'm going to hold down Alt and drag it over to make a copy of it. And I'm going to align it down at the bottom of the artboard as well. And with everything selected, I can take a look at the size of this by hitting this transform button. Depending on the size of your display, these numbers might already be over here to the left. And I can use that same reference point tool right there to change the width and the height. I can also hit this button to constrain the width proportions, height proportions as well. So if I do that, if my drawing is done right, when I type in 30, it should fix itself, the height to be around 22. I mean, that's within like a millionth or something like that. That's definitely within our tolerance for what we want to do there. So now, the good thing about this is I've made one move of one alignment, and I've let the numbers take care of it, so I'm less likely to eyeball stuff, right? So this part is what we're calling on the handout part 1, right? And we just isolate that as a new drawing. What Philip was talking about with the line weights is a setting that if we do these kinds of transformations, it will leave the line weights what they are. So if I take another look at our existing line weights, my peak right here is 1 point. And if I look at a coal, it's still 0.5 and dashed. And if I look at a regular topo line, it's still 1/4 point. So that's good. Where you can get into trouble is if you use the transform tool to scale things. So if I took this, if I took like a copy of something over here, one of my lines, and I went to my object and transformed it, there's a scale option, which is good if I knew the percentages. So if I knew, like, if I brought in a scale drawing at a 1/4 inch and I wanted to scale it up to a 1/2 inch scale, and I just want to do like 200%, that would double the size uniformly. I could also do non-uniform as well. But this option here would scale the strokes and effects as well if I had that checked. And that's something that we don't want to do in this case, but maybe down the road you're doing something and you want to visually be consistent, you would click on that option. And what it would do is it would scale the object all the way up. And because I picked something that was starting at a 0.25 stroke in here, I've scaled it up, and it's scaled up 200% to a 0.5 stroke that's up in there. We shouldn't have that problem if you use the the method that I used in the initial one. That's a good way to avoid that. But it's good to know that's there. I've definitely used it in some projects where I want the drawing to look exactly the way it looks right now. I just need it bigger or smaller. And that way I don't have to go and hyper manage all the line weights. I just scale the stroke up with it. So we've got that part done. The next part is to look at the actual control points. So if I go into Rhino, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a new model in Rhino. And I'm going to use the large or the small objects inches template and open that up. And for clarity, I'm just going to change my grid options for a second here to take off the grid. And what I'm going to do, well, what I've done is I've taken a look at the actual, I grabbed this, my drawing itself, and what we've done is we've taken a look at the bottom left corner, and that's our registry mark. So you want something nice and straight. Maybe you tape a straighter piece if you've got a frayed edge on your drawing. You tape it to a straighter piece of paper. You secure that piece of paper down to the desk, and you're measuring this to be 0, 0, and you're finding the control points in your drawing. And you're literally just using X and Y coordinates off of that corner point, right? That's going to correspond to our Rhino model that we make here. So to set it up, I'm going to just create a couple layers. I'm going to have a layer that is the, this is the boundary for my drawing. So I'll just call this the border. I'm also going to have a layer that is my translated splines. Those are the splines that were F splines. I'm going to have a layer that is my control point markers. And since we looked at the control points and we saw that the control points have 2 line weights, if I know that ahead of time, if I know that I've got a drawing that has 2 different line weights, I want to keep the information on 2 different layers. So I've got 2 sub layers that I'm going to make. One under the control point markers is going to be the circles. And one of the sub layers is going to be the crosses. And that way I can keep them separated and change the line weights in Illustrator later on. We've also got our new spline. So that's going to be on a layer. And then that new spline has a control polygon. And you can call your layers what you think is appropriate, but you want to keep them straight in that amount. So that should be enough for layer wise that will cover things. And we can change the colors, so I can change my black to the spline. My control polygon, I'm going to change to a red color. My translated splines are black. I'll leave my border black too. The border is important so that my splines transverse all the way across, and that's going to be the same size as our drawing is in here. So I'm going to use the rectangle command that's under curve, rectangle, corner to corner. So my corner of my rectangle is 0, and the width of my drawing is 30 inches. My model's already in inches, so I can just type 30. My height's 22. So that's the border of my drawing. I'm going to lock that layer. Right now it's on the wrong layer, so I'm going to right-click border and say change object layer so that it's on the border. And I'm going to lock that layer so that I can't move it or scale it by mistake. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, after I've measured all my drawings, I've got basically a list of control points, and I want to keep them separated by spline. So you should have 5 little lists, and they should have with them 2 numbers, the X coordinate and the Y coordinate on each one. So I've grabbed an example one off of the example drawing, and I measured it. And I used, I had a T square, and I used a 1/16 inch type of as my threshold, and I'm just going to type in and create the curve using those coordinates that I wrote down. So the curve that we're going to create is going to be a curve, and it's going to be a freeform curve, and it's going to be a control point curve. That's the standard curve in Rhino. That's a B-spline curve. The type command for that is is the actual curve. So if I type in curve, that's the default curve in Rhino. It's a NURBS curve. This is important that it says degree equals 3 because that's our standard degree setting for a curve. If it says something other than that, like 3, or like it says like 2 or 4, it shouldn't. But if it does, just click on it and change the number to be 3 to make sure that you're doing a 3-degree curve. For the started curve, I'm not selecting an object in here. I'm entering the points that I got out of my measurement of the drawing itself. If you've measured it and you've got fractions, a quick way to change it, and a good way to do it, is to use the calculator in Rhino. So if I go over here to the panels, there's a calculator panel, so that if I don't know, like for instance, what 1/16 is, I can get that number and I can run the calculator inside of a command. So you can see that I'm running the calculator, but I haven't left my curve command, so I can get numbers really quick on the side here and type it in. If I only had a number that was, let's say my first curve, I only needed the number 0.0625, I can set go. If you've never seen that on a calculator, it's because it's for Rhino to send go. If I hit go, it sends that number to the command line. It's not really helpful in this case because we're actually asking for 2 numbers with a comma separated by a comma. But if it was a y coordinate and that was the only y coordinate, so like if I had this number and it was 10 and 1/16, I could add it to 10 and say go, and it would send that coordinate. But it doesn't recognize just one number, so it's still asking for a starter curve. It needs 2 points to start a curve, the x and the y. If I don't give it a z, it's going to assume that the z is 0. So I'm going to ignore the z, and I'm going to enter just the x. So I've got my numbers here. I've got 10.625, and I don't hit enter. I just hit a comma to separate the 2 values. And then I hit enter when I've got both the x and the y values in. That's going to draw the first control point. The second one. Okay, that's my last point. When I've entered my last point, oh, I got to change my degree. I changed it by mistake. 10. That's why it's loose like that. It should look like that. 10-degree curve is definitely not what we want. When I've entered my last point, I hit enter to accept the curve, and that's drawing the curve that's in there. I don't know if you guys can see it. I don't know if there's a light on this thing or not. I've got some kind of, you can see it when we turn the lights on. It's talking about that one right there. So the moment of truth is if we hit the lights and see how close it is on those numbers right there. See how good I was at measuring it. It's kind of hard to see, but we can leave it up there. So it's this one that's the peak right there. Cool.
Mike, can you turn
No, I cannot do that. I'm sorry, Philip. So what Philip's talking about is now that I've entered those control points in, that is part of it. So when you would hit F10, you turn it on. You can also hit this button here, and that's going to turn the control points on to trace the lines in. So those should be at the same spot that you've done before. So that's the process. You're going to do that for. The important thing is that you want to keep track of the points, and then don't remeasure points. So you've got shared points, right? So kind of keep track, maybe leave a little note or something on there that says, once I run into a shared point, I go find it where I've already written down, and that way I'm guaranteed that that point's in the same exact spot. And that'll help with your registry as well, since that's the way you drew it. So you don't want to double measure anything, for sure. I'm going to run that type of thing. I did an earlier one from that drawing as well. This curve here. So I'm going to copy that one and bring it over here. And I'm going to paste it in there. So now I've got two of those curves. And I'm going to change it to the translated spline layer. So now I've got two of those curves on there. I'd have three more. The next thing I would do during that process is, once that I have them in there, is to draw an interpolated curve as well, an interpolated spline. So that one I've got on the new spline. I've got the new spline layer on right now. So these are my translated splines. I changed the object layer to that. On my new spline layer, I'm going to have the new spline. How you decide how to do that is going to be influenced by your read of what's going on with your splines here. But what we're kind of looking for is almost a summation, maybe, like a kind of an averaging that looks at what's going on overall, and a nice smooth method that when we see things as outliers, it's okay to ignore. So if you've got a weird lightning bolt that goes down to the ground or something like that, or you've got something that did some kind of illegal move that was just a mistake, that's okay. We don't bring that into account. We don't automatically accept that. This is when the editing kind of comes in. But the important thing is for sure that it touches both sides. So I've got my O snaps on down below here, and I want to make sure that I've got the near snap on. That's going to guarantee that I have a intersection, and it's going to be touching the edge. You can see that near snap happening right there. So wherever I decide to start, I want that on there. If I right-click the near snap, it's the only active one. And I don't need my smart track or anything else for this stuff. So it's very simple. Once I decide, so I'm using that same control curve, the curve command, to draw my spline. And for the sake of argument, let's say I had some other splines that went up higher and pulled mine up to this point. I want to end on a near snap as well and guarantee that my new spline connects both sides like that. Okay? My new spline needs a new control polygon. We did them in blue. We're going to do this one in the red. What we said was about the control points is that if we look at them, if this was a degree 1 curve, it would be a polyline that looked like that. So I can take advantage of that knowledge, and what I'm going to do is make a copy of this. So I'm going to go to Transform Copy, and I'm going to click on the In Place clickable option here. That's going to put a copy of it in place. So I've got two here. I'm going to put that on the Control Polygon layer. So I'm going to change my object layer. So now I've got two objects here that are identical. This red one, instead of redrawing it, although I'll turn on the control points for this one so you can see what we're looking at. This red one, I'm going to just go to Edit, and I'm going to change the degree of the curve. So I'm going to go down to Change Degree. And it's telling me right now that the degree is 3, so I'm going to change it to 1. So that's the control polygon for that curve. That's what that curve looks like. Actually, this one is off. I might have to do the deformable option. If that's the case. That's a user error for sure. It is weird. It typically works. That's okay. If that doesn't work for you, what we want to look for, what we want to see, is something that approaches that. So if that doesn't work, that's okay. The other way to do it is you just draw it really quickly. I use the polyline command, and I've got my control points on here. These control points are in editing mode for that object. I can snap to them, but I can't right now because I don't have the point snap on. I need to go up and turn my point snap on. And that will allow me to snap to points. And I can just it's a one-time deal, so it's not like we have to do this multiple times. That's what we should have got out of there. That's what the 1 degree curve looks like. See if I do the rebuild real quick. Made me reach for it. So the better one to use is the extract control polygon. I had to dig a little deeper into my Rhino tool belt for that one. Haven't used that one in a good 5 years. But more knowledge for you guys. There's a command that's called extract control polygon that will take it and create it like that. Either way, it's important that if I turn these two curves on, I don't get duplicate control points. They should be the same set of control points. Those control points are going to go into our new drawing along with the translated splines control points. So we know that we need basically the control points for all this stuff that's going to go in there. It's good to wait till the end. Since these control points are basically a drawing mechanism and we're not using them to create new geometry, I don't want to mark them in the middle of everything. I wait till the end and I mark them right just all the way through. So I'm going to go and I'm going to select all my curves. The control polygon is okay. I don't have to really worry about that because that'll have the same control points as my new spline. And I turn on my control points to show all the control points in my drawing. I'm going to go to the control point marker layer, and under there I'm going to go to the circle layer. And I'm going to draw the first one over here to the left. So I'm going to use the circle commands. Center of the circle, that point snap's going to come in. I'm going to use that. My radius on that is going to be 1/8 of an inch because the overall thing is 1/4 wide, right? I'm going to change my layer to the crosses layer, and I'm going to draw a line. I don't have a good snap yet. What I need is the quad snap, because a quad snap basically looks at the way a circle is drawn. A circle is drawn by piecing together 3 2-degree arcs, and they create snaps here, 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 and there in every circle. So if I go here to here, I can draw a line. I'm going to right click to repeat the command here to here, draw a line. So now I've got, if I hold down shift, I've got my marker. My marker's ready. They're on the correct layers. I'm going to group them together. Unlike Illustrator, if I group things in Illustrator, it's going to shift everything to one of the 2 layers and say everything now is on that layer because you grouped it. Rhino doesn't think that way. Groups and layers are separate entities, so these things can still be grouped and the layers can be turned off separately. So we take advantage of that. I'm going to copy my markers. with the point snap back on. Oops. So if I right click the point snap, I want to take off my ortho. Ortho is not going to help us at this point. And I can just mark everything out. Not really worried where markers are markers on this thing. Okay. Turn it off. Those control points, those control polygons go away. We can start to see that I need that going out. That's what's going out, and that's my new information going out to it. I want to include all this stuff in here. We're going to do our Illustrator file. We're going to preserve the scale because it was already at the right scale. I'm going to go back in here and open that file up. I'm going to copy that. I make sure my option to paste remember layers is still on there. I want to paste it in there. Because of my marker here, I've got these two little boxes. One box is the selection box because I have a black layer. The other box is my border. The border is the one that I'm worried about aligning up. So make sure you know the difference between those. This, because of the nature of our drawing, will run off by half of the side of the page. That's a normal thing. We need that line to go all the way across in both instances. Right? Looks like I've got one extra curve in there. I've got this guy, which I didn't delete. So I can get rid of him now. The only one red line I should have is the control polygon. So when I look at my layers now, I've got all this stuff separated in layers. I can go into my circles. I believe our circles are 0.5. My crosses are smaller. I think they're 0.15. So I got it backwards. That makes sense. So it'll accept these values even though they're not in this preset pull down. So even though you don't see 0.5 in there, you can enter it manually and it'll read it. So if you start to look at it, you'll start to see that it will do 0.15 even though it's not in there. What else? I've got my new control polygon. That needs to be at a 0.15 as well. So that's just a really thin one. And I've got my new spline. That's thicker. That's at 2. The translated spline should be okay because everything comes in as 1 point by default. So I've got something that looks like that. My markers are there. My darkest is my new one. My other ones are there as well. And this drawing is ready to export. So when I look at my artboards and I turn on my artboard tool, this is artboard 3. That's the name of it, but the actual artboard number is 2. So I don't have to worry about deleting this other drawing, when I export it, so when I do my save as, I want to make sure that I say under the PDF option, instead of use all artboards, I tell it to use arrange and just use the second artboard and not make the other one. So I don't have a blank page. I don't need to preserve. There we go. Got it. So this is our big drawing that's going out to the plotter. And yeah, that's the info that we got on there. Yeah, cool. Any questions while I got the files open? Let me get back to my model here.
So for the control polygon, do we need only one or all five?
Just the new one.
What?
Just the new one.
Okay.
Why is that? Because it's already there in blue for the other ones. In theory, right? You've already done it. Any other questions? Okay. That's all I got. That gets us the drawing, so I'm done. Thank you, guys.